started.
To help you to become a good job seeker. At first, I mean,
Let's
I thought it was cool, but then I said, what do you?
call the meeting to order, folks.
Yeah,
We have a long agenda today, so let's go ahead and get started. Denny Bender is out of town, and he called and wasn't able to make it. So, calling the meeting to order, we have the minutes from the meeting of June 11. They were circulated. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved. I looked at the public agenda a moment ago and no one had signed up. Mr. Hancock's going to be here, but we'll have him speak on his agenda item as opposed to right now. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on the public agenda? If not, let's go ahead to the staff report update. Captain Nicholson.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
This is be my first week with working with you guys. I'm looking forward to it. So, or maybe I shouldn't, but I am looking forward to it. From May 20th to July 8th, we had a total of 71 complaints. 29 are still ongoing. As far as the breakdown, 46 were external complaints. 25 were internal complaints. And as far as the classification type, we had 30 that were improper conduct, 34 were procedural violations, 2 were safety violations, and 5 were unnecessary force. And then from the last meeting that we had, the complaints that were open and closed, we had 11 that are still open from last month. And then we have 13 that were closed.
Are there any questions? I would remind the board to review this information, and if you find a case that you want to ask about, let us know. The minutes from last meeting identified like 4 or 5 cases, and so we'll be working on those to review. Is there any other questions?
I do have a question. If a complaint is still ongoing or pending and it's with the chief, should it or should it not be listed in this report?
I think that when they are actually, once they're closed, your question is if the chief is still looking at the investigation, will it be noted in this report?
As ongoing, right?
It should be.
Okay. Because there is one that is not on there at all, which is still ongoing, and it's, I guess, pending with the chief. And
Okay.
that would be the 20 PSB 1214.
20 PSB 1214?
Yes.
Okay. And I can get some clarification from the chief about that. Would that be the complaint that you were involved
Yes,
with,
sir.
sir? Okay. I did text the chief today and asked him about that, but he's been in meetings all day. I'll try and get some clarification from him before the evening's over and give you a call back.
Because I do see others on here that will still say ongoing,
Mm-hmm.
and they haven't come to a final resolution. And I guess in my reasoning, there's no reason why the one I wrote, if it's still in that ongoing status, should not be listed on here as such.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, I texted the chief this morning, but he's been in meetings. As soon as this meeting's over with, I'll be able to talk to him, and I'll call you and get some clarification on that for you.
Thank you, Captain.
Anything else on the staff report? Any other questions? Well, let's go ahead and move to the racial profiling review update. Captain and Dr. Berger, I think, are are going to make a presentation.
I invited Dr. Berzer up here because no one could talk about his report better than he could. So.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Well, I'm really pleased to be here and address you about this report. This is, of course, this is an important topic, particularly the times we live in today. I say that today, but it's been an important topic for a long, long time in this country. I also want a little bit of thank you to Chief Ramsey for, releasing the data. He's been very good at that and being very transparent. This is actually the second time I've had an opportunity over the last 5 years to look at data, and keep in mind it's just citation data. We don't know much about who all stopped that don't get citations, but studies like this can really lend in guiding the police department on who's getting tickets and what they're getting tickets for, et cetera. So I thought,
Dr. Berzer,
yes.
before you go further, may I ask a question?
yes,
When you're saying looking at the data, my question is, how is the data obtained? Is it through FOIA or open records requests that you make to the PD? Or what?
yeah. This data was actually furnished to me by the police department. So the chief authorized the crime intelligence unit to release 3 years of citation data to me. And so I get that data, and it's in several different types of forms, and we've got to spend some time in cleaning that up and putting it into an analytic format that we can use and tease out different things like gender and race and the types of violations that people were getting citations for. So the answer to the question, it was furnished to me by the police department.
Thank you.
Okay, so I thought what I would do is just kind of hit on some of the key findings. I don't know if you've had a chance to review the report, and I mentioned to Pastor Sims before the meeting that I would be more than glad to come and give a more formalized, little lengthier presentation to any of your groups. Just reach out to me and I'd be glad to do that. So when Chief Ramsey reached out back, just shortly after the first of the year and requested a 3-year look at citations, after we got the data, we discovered that there were about 161,108 citations that were issued from 2016 through 2018. Okay, you think that's a lot of citations, right? Actually, that represents a fairly substantial decrease in citations when you look back at different data points over time. So in all, roughly almost a 19% decrease. So the Wichita Police Department had actually, over those 3 years, wrote 19% fewer citations than they had the 3 years prior to that. And when you look at the data as well, all racial groups, this is telling, all racial groups experienced a decline in getting tickets. So what that told me right off the bat is the fact that, if I'm looking at data and I'm looking at those trend lines and I'm seeing, for example, African Americans going up while I see Hispanic groups and whites going down, that would be a potential red flag to me that there may be policies in place or maybe there's discriminatory police practices taking place. That wasn't what I observed this time. I observed those trends, and they're pretty clear if you look at the report. They appear to go down about the same times, even when we have slight fluctuations to where they go up. You can see all groups go up just slightly. And of course, when you look at gender, males received more citations than females. That's nothing new. That is pretty much the trend across the country. When you look at data like this, I like to say that, that's why, for those of you that have teenage sons, that's why their insurance rates are a little bit higher than your daughters. So, but males received slightly more citations than females. When we looked at, let me first tell you, when we do this type of work, we like to use some type of a benchmark that we can compare back the data to. So for example, if we find that 20% of the citations were issued to African Americans, what do we compare that to? Well, in this case, since it's what we call post hoc data, it's already there, it's just citation data. The only really thing we can do is look at census data from the United States Census Bureau in particular areas. Now, I can tell you, most researchers shy away from doing that because of the validity problems that we have with using census data as kind of a benchmark. But so throughout the report, we use census data very sparingly for that reason. And in fact, other colleagues across the country that I talk with that are doing this type of work have stopped using census data altogether just because of the problems with the data. The best case scenario is if we can come in and set the study up. We could get stop data. Every person that's stopped that might not necessarily get a ticket, but nevertheless they're stopped. That would be better data for us to take a look at. And then we can do what's called, one way we could do is a traffic survey, to where we train a research team, we go out to specific areas, and we observe those areas randomly over the course of a week or 2 weeks, and we develop our own benchmark based on what the drivers are coming in and out of the area based on the observation, if they're black, if they're white, if they appear to be Hispanic, et cetera. That could probably get us closer to a legitimate benchmark. The other thing that we're beginning to experiment with is traffic accident data. Okay, so if we can track traffic accident data over time, looking at race and looking at non-at-fault drivers, we might be able to get a better picture on who the motoring public is. So why non-at-fault drivers? Because those are random events. No one gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to go out and get into an automobile accident. So they're by chance, and that's really pretty good data when we can get a hold of that. So that's another thing that we can do. But those are future studies. Okay, so if you look at by zip code, 67214 and 67208 were the zip codes. If we just specifically look at African Americans, they received over 60% of the citations in those two zip codes. Now, those zip codes, for those of you that aren't familiar with that, if you can picture Wichita State, and you picture just east of there and surrounding Wichita State, that's going to be 67214 and 67208. So it's going to be the near northeast community. Followed the next two zip codes where you'll see African Americans represented there, 30 some odd percent would be 67211 and 67218. Now, the interesting part of this data is we employed a statistical analysis, what we call a relative risk index, which tells us if we compare one group to a control group, which in this case would be Caucasians. So we took a look at African Americans to see what their relative risk of getting a citation was in comparison to Caucasians. This is where it gets a little more telling. So if you look at those top three violations where African Americans are more likely to receive a citation, child restraint under 4 was the leading. They were 24 times more likely to receive a citation for that. Now keep in mind, now we're using census benchmarks. So, there's always some caution there when, we want to throw forward when we use census benchmarks. The second one was transport alcohol or open container, which African Americans were 13 times more likely. And the third violation would be child restraint, which they were 9 times more likely to receive a citation compared to whites. Now, I can tell you, doing this type of research and work for, probably 12 years now, the types of violations that I typically hear minority citizens tell me in focus groups and individual interviews that they're being stopped for, that they believe are for racial profiling, are things like a cracked tail light, or not using your turn signal 100 feet from an intersection, or an obstructed rear view mirror, or having air fresheners hanging down. I'm not quite sure that's a violation, but they tell me they have been stopped for that. And there's some speculation of why, police stop people for, having air fresheners dangling down from their rear view mirror. So when we look at those can certainly be red flags that discriminatory policing may be in play. Not always, but they're red flags. So for example, when I looked at some of those red flags in this data, fail to use turn signal. African Americans were 4 times as likely to receive a citation, okay? Improper display of tag, 4 times more likely. Defective headlight, 3 times more likely. Defective tail light, 4 times more likely to receive a citation. Defective brake lights, 3 times more likely, and a cracked windshield, which is another common theme that I've heard, 2.4 times more likely. And from there, then you go down the list, and it kind of varies somewhat. But, those are the violations that typically I hear that, I'm stopped because I had a cracked tail light or because I had a cracked windshield. I'm detained for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden, you're free to go, and I don't get a warning, I don't get a ticket, and I'm told, what am I supposed to think? I just got stopped because I'm a 26-year-old young black man driving through this neighborhood. So, but again, we need to really dive into this data a little bit more to really make sense on, what's going on here. So, in a nutshell, there's more that we can do, there's more studies that we can do, but that will involve more time. It would involve us actually creating a more accurate benchmark to compare the data back to, and then we would need stop data in addition to citation data. So let me open it up for questions at this point.
Did you try to do any, I read the report and was trying to figure out different ways to approach the data. And it occurred to me that I understand that overall, take the city overall, and you'll get a higher percentage, for example, of black stops versus white stops. But a lot of that may be keyed on police activity in a particular neighborhood. That's what I gathered from the report.
Yeah.
And so that's why you have to watch the census data issue. But what about tracking officers? Is there a way to identify, maybe in a blind study or whatever, whether the officer has a proclivity of pulling over black, brown, or white versus the other?
Yeah.
Has that been considered?
Yeah, that can be done. I mean, there's a lot of literature, and there's many departments have employed what they call early warning systems now, and there's some fairly sophisticated computer software that can help the agency track that, and that is actually almost a gold standard in my mind, because I think that if we have an officer that has a problem with race and is engaging in discriminatory stopping of citizens, I think number one, the frontline supervisor, the police sergeant in most cases, is probably the most important person that's going to be able to make that observation at that point. The other thing that I've written about, and I think it's actually in one of my recommendations, is have police officers during their training sessions on racially or bias-based policing, have them begin to think about and reflect on who they're stopping on their beats, and do this periodically. And then ask themselves, how would this look to the general public if they knew who I was stopping? And not only that, but can I justify why I'm stopping these folks? And is there a race neutral reason why I'm stopping so many African Americans or so many Hispanics? So there's a whole body that pertains to the idea of self-audits, and I think that can go a long ways. I'm currently working on a paper where I kind of tease that out a little bit more, what that would look like. But that's what we call evidence-based practices. When we have the data, when we have citizens' perceptions, we know what their perceptions are. And then we talk to police officers here, and we know, when I took the data back to police officers across the state, we have some rich data there. So this is right to tailor training programs around, grounded in the actual data itself. And by the way, this is the state of Kansas, the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. They were really interested after phase one. I came out with phase one, which was in 2012. And I went up and presented to some of their trainers, and then they wanted to use it. They actually developed their online bias-based policing training right out of the data. And that's the best stuff. I mean, we can look at what others are doing, but when we can look at Kansas and how citizens in Kansas think they've been racially profiled, and in some cases have been racial profiled, I mean, that's the best data to use to develop and tailor training programs. Other questions?
What is obviously you did the 2015 study, and then this more recent study, which was tailored to specific Wichita traffic data. What is your assessment of Wichita vis-a-vis other communities in Kansas or other communities in other states in terms of how does this data look like other places?
It's similar. There's not too many jurisdictions that you can go to, and you're going to find African Americans in particular overrepresented in stops compared to census data. We can even look at some of the pioneering work of John Lamberth in the New Jersey Turnpike studies, which really broke open this big area of racial profiling back in the 1980s, and it was the same thing. And there they got into some legal issues pertaining to what data is acceptable, et cetera. And that's where we begin to toy around with this idea of creating our own benchmarks, and that was successful in the courts there. And of course, what they did, a number of public defenders begin to see the same thing over and over, that primarily black drivers are being stopped on the turnpike at disproportionate rates and saying that they were searched, and oftentimes there was nothing in their cars. And so the lawyers, what they did is they formed basically a class action suit. They put them all together and were able to get into court. And as a result of that, New Jersey was placed on a consent decree for, I believe, 5 years to correct some of those practices. And there were some pretty bad, it was pretty bad at the time. Researchers found that what they were doing, they would what we call ghost the data. So, for example, a trooper would pull over an African American but would record it as white, so they could keep those percentages down so they wouldn't go over their representation of the population.
Do you have any data on how many times an officer in Wichita pulls somebody over but does not issue a citation, so you don't know?
I'd like to have that data. That's the best data we can collect. There was one study that was commissioned, Dr. Brian Withrow, who's no longer at the university, he's down at Texas State now. Back in 2000, he did the Wichita Stop Study, and he collected data for, I believe it was 6 months, collected stop data and what happened after the stop and whether they received a citation. That's really the only known study. He did a follow-up to that, I believe 2 years later, and in fact did show those incidents had decreased somewhat over time. But since that time, no, because that takes commitment. I think right now you have the chief here that is progressive enough to where he would commit to those types of studies. We've talked a lot about that, and so that potentially could come in the future. Yes, ma'am.
It was my understanding that no matter if they make a stop, it's still down as a stop, right? I mean, there's some statistic that says Officer Joe made 5 stops today. He only gave 2 citations. Is that kind of?
There's typically now that's entered into their system every time they stop a vehicle, okay. And so we would have. I guess we could get access to that data, but we would like, from a research perspective, to have some control over, how we get that data. And we'd like, because there's more data we'd like to collect other than just a stop. We want to know additional information, what happened, and, particularly if there was an arrest, was there a use of force involved in that? And then we can begin to play around with the statistics and cross-tab a lot of different variables.
And none of this, though, is socioeconomic.
Well, I believe that some of this is socioeconomic. I think that child restraints is one when you look at that. Now, this is interesting because when I had this conversation with Chief Ramsey and Deputy Chief Gibbons a few weeks ago, actually it's been a few months ago, I told them just that, and I think I report that in the actual document that, this particularly could indicate some socioeconomic. People just can't afford child restraint seats, and they're expensive. And so I don't want to give it away, but the police department is working on some things to make that much, much better real soon.
I just know that many years ago when my sons were teenagers, I ended up in court because of speeding tickets and et cetera. And my first time in court, I sat there and I watched all these people come up before the judge. They had a taillight didn't work. They had this, they had that, and I sat there and I thought, these people are poor. That's why that's happening. The people, and then my husband lived in Alabama where when you get to your license for your car, as long as you got one working taillight, that's all they care about. That's because they got so many poor people that don't have 2 working ones.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is that some of these stops and things, the police are enforcing the law. We need to look at what the other side of how those laws are affecting the poor. They're being made by, and in my opinion is rich white men are making the laws and they have no clue.
Right, yeah.
And so
I
that's
agree.
why I ask about that, because some of these things, it's not that people are not caring. They just don't have any money.
Yeah, I think that's the case. And, look at even the equipment violation, taillights, cracked windshields. Those are expensive to get replaced. And
Oh, yes.
the police department's acting on that now. They just started a lights on program,
Yes.
which is a great deal. And so I'm actually doing the evaluation of that program. So it's going to be interesting when we get all of the voucher data back in. I've got a survey that's been placed at each of the locations. So we're going to learn some about what the citizens think about it, their satisfaction with the police department before and after that, which I would hypothesize probably improves quite a bit. But that will be interesting. But I think that's a really, really good move on the police department's part.
I also was wondering if there's a way to evaluate data versus on a officers that are charged with traffic enforcement versus a patrol officer.
Yeah.
I know that I think all of us have done a ride around. I assume one of the prerequisites for being on this board is at one time, and it appeared to me that there were multiple opportunities to pull people over. There's just a lot of opportunity for any kind, and the officers on the patrol beat don't typically pull everybody over they can. I mean, they just can't, they wouldn't be able to get their job done if they did. And so I just wondered if anybody had tried to analyze whether an officer had a specific task that it was encouraged in traffic performance vis-a-vis the officer who didn't, if that data could be analyzed, or whether it would be worthwhile analyzing.
Well, you could certainly tease that out if you had the data of who your traffic officers were. You could tease that out and do some cross comparisons, sure. But, you speak to discretion, and police work is highly discretionary in nature. So, the officer's decision to stop a vehicle may be based on several different factors. And of course, we would like to think that one of those factors is not race, and when that happens, that's where we have the issue. So, and that's one of the problems, too, of researching this issue, is the fact that there is an awful lot of discretion that police officers have in the field. They largely work independently. They don't have a supervisor over them every minute. And, that's problematic from a research standpoint, trying to investigate an important subject as racial profiling.
I don't want to ask all the questions. You guys have questions? Yeah. In your 2015 report, you talk in several places about the pretext stop.
Yeah.
Which I think police officers believe is a very useful tool, because you have a person you're suspicious of that just left the drug house, as the example. And so now they're going to look for the cracked taillight or whatever, so they could do a further investigation. Now, that, from a traffic stop standpoint, probably looks a lot like if it's a black male, for example, a profiling kind of stop, although it's tied to some other event, typically. Does the data sort those out so you can look at a stop that's tied to an extraneous event, like leaving the drug house or talking to somebody that was a known gang member, or whatever the pretext is?
That would have to be collected. I mean, you could do that, but you'd have to make that part of your collection program. So that's why when I talk about it, the best case scenario, what we like to do is kind of set that study up of what data we really need to make a more informed decision, or, so the police department can make more informed decisions on their practices. Yes, Pastor.
Yes, Dr. Berzer, I'm looking at page 22 on your conclusions of the report, since we're talking about racial profiling. And you've already said in your assessment that there is a higher percentage for African Americans than other racial groups. My question is, would you then draw a conclusion as related to systematic racism in your findings?
Not on these findings, and the reason I can is because it's citation data geared back towards Census Bureau data. So it's very difficult to make that. And I tell you, I've testified as an expert on these very issues, and the last case that I worked with a lawyer on in the deposition was trying to get the census data to court, and it didn't. The federal judge didn't see it that way, so it wasn't let in. Again, there are much more superior benchmarks that we can use if we really want to study this. We can develop our own. We can, look at traffic citation data over time and maybe get a better idea of what the motoring public is. But certainly this is, this data gives the police department some ammunition, so to speak, on who's getting tickets and what they're writing tickets for. I kind of gather when I look at reductions in citations that perhaps now that, policing is moving more towards evidence-based approaches, smart policing is what they call it sometimes, maybe they're rearranging who they're going out and giving tickets to. They're using high traffic volume areas to where there's a lot of traffic accidents, and they're deploying police officers in those areas, which would mean they're just not randomly, like maybe 20 or 30 years ago, you randomly drove around and saw somebody and just wrote a ticket. And that's just my speculation.
Yeah, I was thinking another way to look at it is, the Wichita Police Department are focused on other areas. When I did my ride along with the city and the county, it was just a completely different, I don't know, it was a completely different experience where with Wichita PD, we were responding to things and going out to things, and we didn't really have time to pull people over. In the county, we sat in a parking lot and we pretty much, should we pull that car over? Should we pull that car over? They just had, the amount of the workload that they had was significantly less. So I guess maybe, I know we're asking for a lot of other data that's not here, but curious about kind of, if they're not writing less tickets, they might be doing, like, what are they doing more of in some other area?
How are your findings, and again, looking at the 2015 report, you make a lot of recommendations, or at least a discussion of a lot of approaches on training. What is your assessment of the Wichita Police Department's use of that kind of information to train officers?
Well, I think Chief Ramsey, he has the report, he's read it, and I think he agrees with some of it. And, police training traditionally has been very, militaristic. It's almost like you're, in some cases, going into basic training, not probably to that extent, but somewhat, it's a very structured environment. And if you look nationally, there's a movement to really deviate away from those training models and to go more towards adult basic education models. And there's recommendations of increasingly partnering with universities. And we have a very good relationship since the academy, is now on our campus. In fact, my office is on the 3rd floor of the academy building. And, I'm doing evidence-based work for the police department now. And that's what we're there for, it's one thing to do a program, but it's another thing, does the program work? And if it doesn't work, why do we still do it if the evidence isn't there? So I think we have some golden opportunities here in Wichita, Kansas, to do a lot of good things.
Any other questions?
I just, based upon what you just said about you doing work for the WPD, do you consider that a conflict of interest at all? I guess actually as it relates to the reporting of your findings?
Yeah, no, they came to us because they wanted an independent body to look at that, and universities, we're trained in statistics methods and things of that nature, police operations and, those types of things. So it's important that, the analyst involved should have some understanding of operations, police operations, to be able to discern some of what you're seeing in the data. That's critical.
Isn't there another group, a racial profiling group, that has used the same data, but their conclusions are very different than yours?
We met with Walt Chapples, who you're referring to, and his group a few weeks ago. I think Captain Nicholson was in that meeting, I believe. Our data actually was fairly close.
Okay.
There were a few areas. Now, we we were able to get some additional data that he didn't have, but overall, it's pretty much, it was fairly similar.
I think the challenge is that there is this perception within the public that this is going on, even with this study and even with these results.
Yeah.
We often find that perception is reality.
Mhm.
And obviously, there is a disconnect between what the data is suggesting and what the public perceives. Obviously, the more that we can begin to create that partnership that you speak of and that I wholeheartedly support, the better it will be. But there's going to be an uphill battle when it comes to people of color and the police department. I know we've tried different angles, from hiring more people that look like us and, act like us, that kind of thing. But there's an uphill battle that needs to continue, and I appreciate the work and the effort that you've put into it. But I think it's the first step in many others that need to come.
Yeah, I agree. Particularly, my view of looking at this issue for a long time now and studying policing for a long time is that there has been no other racial or ethnic group that's been policed the way the African Americans have in this country. And there's a history there. Oftentimes, we don't use an Afrocentric lens the way we look at things. And that's missing from policing totally. From academy training, it's just not there. And I was encouraged that at least Wichita now, the captain of the training academy had a group of African American leaders come into the training academy the first couple of weeks of this new class and talk to the recruits and interact with them. I think that's what you'll find. That's what my research found that they want to do. And even the police officers, when I went out and shared the data with them and said, hey, this is how African American citizens are saying you're racially profiling. What do you think about that? Mm-hmm. One of the things I found is that they said, hey, let's bring them into the training as well. Have them there, and we can talk about these issues. So I think that's very, very important. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. When I look at racial profiling, the African American experience with that is horrendous in this country. And it goes back, as you know, to slave patrol days, and that's how the modern policing in the United States was formed. Mm-hmm. So.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Captain Nicholson, Watson Outreach Program?
Anybody have any questions about that study that he just presented for me, or?
All right. Any questions for the captain about the racial profiling study?
I guess I do. There's, back in my head, I've been thinking, my experience is I've been a school teacher for 20 years, and our discipline referrals is something that we have always looked at. We've looked at data with all of the high schools in Wichita, and then we break it down by grade level and by race and gender. And then just the last 3 years or so, individual teachers, a couple of times a year, we are given our own list of write-ups that we've had, discipline write-ups, and we have conversations. We're asked to talk about the discipline write-ups that we had and why is this so much different? Are these the only students who have had these behaviors in your classroom and this kind of thing? Are those kind of conversations happening on an individual basis?
Yes, we have something called the Eis Alerts. And so like if an officer is involved with so many pursuits within a certain time frame, he gets so many coaching and mentorings within a certain time frame, or use of force, then his supervisor, it's all entered on Blue Team, which is where we enter all of our discipline or those sorts of things. And if once he reaches a certain threshold, then that supervisor gets an alert on his dashboard that says, well, Officer Jones has had X amount of whatever within a certain time frame. And that supervisor he goes and looks at each one of those incidents that have been documented, and he looks and sees if there's an issue, there's something that he needs to be coached and mentored about, maybe something that the supervisor missed, and there might need to be some sort of internal investigation. So we do have a system in place. But one thing that I'll kind of echo on as far as what Dr. Berzer said is that, When you talk about people feeling that they've been treated unfairly, if anybody feels like that they've been treated unfairly, then that's an issue that needs to be addressed. And so, we talk about procedural justice, being fair, being transparent, being accountable, and giving people voice. So, if people feel that they've been treated a certain way, then it's incumbent upon us as working with the community, because we're co-producers of public safety, to make sure that we address those concerns and they're resolved one way or the other.
Other questions?
Captain Nicholson?
Yes.
From the training aspect to your new recruits, I know you talk about bias-based policing, I believe, to them, correct?
Yes.
Is there a cultural sensitivity piece also included in that bias-based policing?
I'm glad you asked that. Dr. Dolores Craig from Wichita State is going to be putting on some training for the Wichita Police Department that addresses just that issue right there, cultural competency. Because the bias-based in policing is good, but I think that cultural competency is also good as well. So the more training that we can get, the better, and the more diverse type of training that we get is good for the whole organization and its community. Anything else? All right, next up is Officer Watson. He's going to come and talk about his outreach program.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Glad to see a lot of you guys here. I know a couple of you guys. Mr. Odell's my brother from another mother. Mr. Sims, I know you also. I was asked to come talk about my outreach program. First of all, I want to introduce myself to you guys, give you a little history about myself. My name is Danielle Watson. I am born and raised here in Wichita, Kansas. Attended College Hill Elementary, Brooks Middle School, graduated from Southeast High School. I did go off to college for 1 year, St. Mary College, to play basketball, but then I came back here to Wichita, graduated from Wichita State. So lifelong resident here, was employed by or hired by the police department in 2004. I spent my first 4 years in Patrol South. The first year I was on our second shift. The next 3 years I was on fourth shift. And then after 4 years, I knew I wanted to go police the area that I grew up in. So then I applied to move to Patrol North, where I was on third shift. I was an FTO during that year. And then I went to our SCAT North team that deals with gangs and drugs, particularly drugs, doing search warrants, things like that. Then I went to our gang unit. Our old gang unit consisted of 4 gang officers. We were out of City Hall. And then in 2011, I wanted to do something different. Again, I wanted to work in the North area. So I went to community policing from 2011 until 2018, and now I'm currently assigned to our Violent Crimes Community Response Team. And basically the goals of that team is to focus on violent crime, gang crime, and also drugs. So I've been involved in several different things as far as this police department is concerned. But one thing that I've always noticed, especially patrolling the area that I grew up in, I wanted to do more outreach. Instead of suppression, I wanted to do more prevention. And when we talked about the car stop study and patrol and all those things, when we're on patrol, we really don't have time to do the outreach. In community policing, I had more time, but still I had to help patrol because our call loads are just really high. And then going into our Violent Crimes Community Response Team, working with gang members. I grew up in a gang-infested area. Working with gang members, I noticed that I worked that we would police more of the African-American community. And to me, seeing a lot of these gang members one-on-one, they're not as tough as they seem to be. They come from broken homes, single homes. They don't realize the potential that they have. And so 2014, when I was assigned to community policing, That's when Ferguson and all that happened. I knew that we needed, as a police department, needed to get involved with some of our community leaders, specifically our African American leaders. And so we started going to the Ministerial League meetings in 2014, myself and Sergeant Brunsheen at the time. And we've been involved in those meetings ever since. And a lot of good things have come from those meetings. And then 2 years ago, when we started our violent crimes community response team, I still saw that we needed to do more outreach, more prevention, connect some of these families with resources. And so I approached the chief, came up with, I have a 30-minute PowerPoint. I won't go through it all today, but I do have a website that has this complete PowerPoint on it. And if you guys want to write it down, it is Positive Interactions, it's all one word, .org. And like I said, it's a 30-minute PowerPoint. It really goes, it gives a little more background for me. Like I said, I grew up single parent home, Northeast community. And so kind of my mind frame when I deal with a lot of these kids, I give them my story and I tell them, hey, if I can do it, you can do it. But what I do want to show you is one of the videos that is on my PowerPoint, just to kind of start it out. And then I'll tell you what I've done since February when I was given the green light. So.
How you doing?
All right. How you feel?
I'm good.
All right.
How you
Thanks
doing?
for coming out.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Hey, y'all, this is Matt Forte for y'all Bears fans.
Hello.
This is my nerve center. So they kind of monitor everything that's going on the pod cameras. We have shot spotters, so whenever they like fire a gun, it lights up on the screen.
Wow.
They put together a briefing what you missed. Every day we talk about what happened yesterday and kind of the game plan for the day moving forward. So we'll ride around to some spots. I grew up on the East End, so we'll go through some nostalgic things of my past.
Okay.
But so that's kind of like the game plan. All right?
Okay.
All right, cool.
So you grew up
Yeah.
in, you said the East Side, right?
Yep, but see, this is the west end of this district. It's a pretty big district. It goes from 75th Street on the north all the way to 95th Street.
So in other words, you got a lot of responsibility.
Absolutely. And I mean, because a lot of people don't see police officers as people.
Exactly.
And in my opinion, you have to want to do this.
Yes.
And you have to want to do it for the right reasons.
Exactly.
Because if you don't, then you're not out here making a difference. Used to be a theater right here, Rhodes Theater, I used to go to. I think I saw Jaws there. I'm dating myself.
So how does it feel that you're the commander and this is basically the city you grew up in?
Actually, Matt, it's a mixed feeling for me because when I grew up on the East End, it wasn't nearly as violent.
Yeah.
Okay, it was a different time. So whatever I can do to make it get back towards how it was when I grew up, I'm willing to do that, and I'm really invested in doing that. It's more than just a job for me,
So with the gang activity and stuff, you guys got to really keep up.
Yeah, like yesterday was a real bad day in the district. We had 4 shootings, 1 murder, 3 people shot in 1 incident. So we kind of talk about all of that, and if it was gang driven, because what we want to do as a philosophy is intercede with like retaliatory shootings. Like if one gang shoots one gang, then it might lead to another. We have to evaluate what was the cause of the shooting. We just crossed over into another territory. One gang, just last week, their leader was killed right on this block. Okay, and we try and evaluate who actually did it. Is there going to be retaliation? So we try. We're doing better than last year with our crime numbers.
Okay.
But one murder is one too many. One shooting is one too many.
Exactly.
So he's chasing the guy with a gun.
Is this from 7-8 Navalon?
That's close.
Okay, 7-8 Navalon.
We're just gonna ride on it.
South Chicago is on South Chicago South
Looks
crossing
like-
77.
So somebody has a gun?
Yeah. A couple officers chasing him with a pistol. He might have him in custody. We don't know yet. He's got him.
White tank and blue jeans, he's in custody now. He's in custody. He did toss the gun. Can I get another car over there with 6722? South Chicago and Dorchester.
We got him.
We're across the alley from the BP. In the alley. Okay. Custody squad, we're just checking out what he taught.
Sound like they're in custody, so we can
All right.
come out. Yeah.
Don't worry, again, he is in custody. He is in custody. Just toss the gun. He's find the gun. Slow it down. Just say help finding the gun.
You guys good? Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool.
So had a guy, they were chasing, he had a gun, and he ran, they were chasing him down, they caught him, but he tossed the gun before they caught him. And now they're trying to find the gun where he tossed it at.
He ran through this lot.
Okay.
I never really lost him after that, except for a brief time when he was outside Chicago.
You all right?
Oh, yeah.
You sure? All right. Okay.
Not bad for a senior citizen.
I know.
Being in the car and being in pursuit, my heart was beating a little bit. And when we pulled up, he hopped right out, and I was kind of looking like, should I get out? Or but it shows you the details and how serious they take their job. I mean, the guys, especially chasing the guy with the gun, they're putting their own lives in danger. And it's to keep the guns off of the street and try to make things better. So it gives you a new appreciation for what they do.
You know who that is?
What's up, man? What's happening? Don't. Hey, I'm not a. You see?
Yep.
See, that's what we were talking about.
Right.
You didn't even want to shake my hand. I used to play for the Bears. You watch the Bears? See, the narrative, even to the young kids, is that all police officers are bad, and that's not the case. So we got to find some kind of common ground. He didn't even know or realize that I played for the Bears, and then even when we told him, he said, "F you," So we gotta find something where that's not the case, and that's not happening. So, what do you think, we could do?
Usually, when you deal with the police, you're not having a good day. Because if you don't call us when everything's fine,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So we need to do more positive, what we call them is positive community interactions. Just kind of having this dialogue, talking about
We'll
things.
stop it right there. So you heard what he said. Usually when people call the police, it's not because they're having a good day, right? And so we have to have more positive interactions. When I started looking into this program and doing research, I just had community engagement program. But after I watched that video, I said through positive interactions. And so how can we have more positive interactions as a police force? Again, you still have to have your patrol, go out there, do the day-to-day calls. You have to have your enforcement, but you also have to have your intervention and prevention also. And so through my studies, I want to focus on youth. There's a James Baldwin quote. There's James Baldwin quotes throughout my PowerPoint presentation, but it says, "These are all our children. We will profit by or pay for whatever they become." And so if we don't reach our children at a young age, then we're going to pay for them falling through the cracks. And we have a lot of kids out there that need our help, not only from a police department standpoint, but from a community standpoint. And with me growing up being in high school in the late 90s, to me, I had more of a village per se. So I had several mentors, whether it were mentors in church, basketball. My mom always kept me busy, but that was the key. I had a strong mother. Some of these kids don't have a strong mom or dad. And so those are the kids that we normally see out in the streets committing some of these crimes. So what I've done since February, like I said, I got the green light in February to engage the community. I partnered with our housing program, our housing department, and they have a program called the Way to Work program. I've sent children to this program. Basically, what we do, housing has a grant to pay the salaries for these kids. We partner them with different businesses, And for 20 hours a week, they go work at these businesses that have partnered with the housing department. They employ them, but we pay their salary. But what was different this year, I worked with the director, and so I was at the orientation for the parents and for the kids. I had the kids for 16 hours or 12 hours the week of orientation. They all saw this PowerPoint presentation. They were all able to interact with me. I didn't wear my uniform. Sometimes that uniform is a barrier. And so I had a lot of compliments from a lot of the parents saying, we enjoyed seeing you out of uniform. And I think it was Mr. Sims said, I didn't even recognize you not being in uniform. Because, I mean, we do look different. Sometimes we're more intimidating, sometimes not. But through this program, I have probably 5 kids that I've been working with intensely. One young lady has been involved in human trafficking. Another young man is a gang member. He's a documented gang member in our database. But since he and I have connected, he's done really well. He's one of our best workers. We communicate through text every day. And there was actually an incident Monday night where rival gang members came to his house looking for a fight. Well, Mom, she didn't call until after everything was over, but Mom did call me. I was able to hand select an officer that I thought would be good to go out, make the initial report, and I did the follow-up. And so Tuesday, I spent most of the day with him at work. I actually took him to his parole orientation. So me and his parole officer, who I know personally, we have a plan for this young man. And we're gonna work with him intensely to try to get him through these next 18 months because he has an 18-month underlying sentence. And if he messes up, he's going to jail for 18 months. And then the next young man, and I just discovered this yesterday, so yesterday was actually a pretty rough day for me. He's been in our program for 3 years. He's in one of our city departments, I won't say which one, but he is an excellent worker. He already has certificates to do different computer designs, IT, whatever, but his home life it's basically non-existent. Mom has some mental health disorders that we're gonna work on. I've given her some resources. Dad's not there. And so now he's at home with grandma. I had to take him to grandma's. Older sister is there because she went through the same thing. So it's actually a lot. It's more than I thought it would be. But just interacting with those 2 young men this week, I see that I have a lot of work to do. And you know, when we talk about crime, when we talk about the shootings, we've had several shootings since the beginning of this year, and a lot of them are African-American kids. And so one thing that I see when we go to do these investigations, we don't get a lot of cooperation because of the stigma from being a police officer. So these positive interactions are very key. And like I said, since February, I have several different families who have come to me. I've been able to solve several investigations. One was a homicide, one was an aggravated battery, just because the families felt comfortable coming to me with the information. They knew I would be fair. One lady, she turned in her daughter who had committed a shooting the week before, and she said, "This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do." And she sat and she cried in front of me. But if it wasn't for this program or me reaching out to the community, that wouldn't have happened. So, like I said, we have a lot of work to do, us as a police department and as a community. But just like the commander said, you know, I have a passion for it. This is my city. This is where I grew up, and so that's what I'm committed to do. So, any questions, comments, concerns? Yes, sir.
I just want to commend you for your work. A lot of people talk about the problems And a lot of people complain about the problems, but few actually do something to be part of the solution.
Yes, sir.
So I want to commend you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And actually, that is one of the things that I'm really having an issue with, because I have a lot of resources and I've had a lot of meetings, but then when it's time to go put in the work, it's like, it's just me. I've had several others that come up and step up to the plate, but if I keep plugging away at it, I know everything will come together. So I have to stay positive with my positive interactions, if that makes sense. So,
Officer Watson, you're part of the solution, and we just say to you, keep moving.
thank you. Appreciate it.
Other questions?
I had a question. Is it, you know, as your career as a law enforcement officer, is this seen as, I mean, like, to do community engagement work, do you get paid more than just to do patrol?
No.
I mean, is it?
No,
so-
my salary actually, to be honest with you, it's a decrease in salary, because with my violent crimes team, we got a lot of overtime. And so whether it's coming in to work some of the shootings, all that, with this engagement program, I don't get any overtime. I just flex my schedule because I want to make it work. So I don't want to take anything from our budget that is not necessary. So I just flex my schedule, and if I answer the phone or if I'm doing something late in the evening, then I kind of flex my schedule the next day.
Oh, it'd be nice if you didn't have to do that. It should, I think.
I like you, Sean.
Yeah, I think the challenge is if it's not rewarded and you're not paid more, then, you know, not more people aren't going to do it. The other question, is there does the police department track anything around positive interactions? Have you seen anything in terms of, you know, community engagements, in terms of like, officer, you need to have this many positive engagements in a month or a year? Is there anything like that?
No, and like I said, being on patrol, even being in community policing, in our violent crimes team that's not 911 driven, it's busy out there. And there are times where, just like Monday, for example, Monday should be one of our slowest days. But several different factors, and like I said, with this virus going on, it has really set me back a lot, because a lot of my positive interactions are in person. But when I hand selected that officer, I got the call around 7 o'clock. It wasn't until 8 o'clock that I was able to return the call. So not only do you have around 8, 9 o'clock, you have shift change, but third shift is one of our lighter shifts, and this was a third shift officer. And so he was headed to a call, didn't have a back, so he was gonna have to wait for a while. Then he had to work that call. He didn't get to that house until 10:30 that night. And so when you say have certain positive interactions, right now, sometimes these patrol officers, they don't have the time to have those positive interactions. Now we try, we really do try, and with the chief has been really good with whenever people come with, or officers come with ideas, he has an open mind. And so when I presented this to him in 2018, he was very open to it. But we just had to have the time and the resources to allow me to do so. And so right now, I'm still part of our violent crimes team, but right now they're operating with 5 officers instead of 6. And if you've watched the news, violent crime is still going on. And so they've had to pull from other places to kind of replace my spot, so.
Anybody else? Thank you, sir.
All right. And Sean, you tell the chief I need a raise.
I think next up was Mr. Hancock.
Yes, sir. Mr. Hancock, you want to take the stage, so to speak, and let's talk about policy 901.
First, I actually want to thank Officer Watson. There are some days you get paid to do what's right, and there's some days your reward is more than money. That's what teachers do all the time. We all wish they were paid more, and they can't be, so we appreciate all y'all trying to make a difference. Policy 901 is nothing compared to what that man is doing, but it's still something I think we can make a difference on. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Vincent Hancock. I live in the Delano neighborhood. I have a professional background in both mass communication and information technology. A couple months ago, I asked you guys to take a look at Policy 901. I didn't tell you there's going to be a pop quiz. Can anybody tell me whose signature appears at the top of the policy? Okay, Chet, you get to go. Yes. So there's some good things in that policy, and there's some things I think that we've got opportunities to improve upon. To summarize and paraphrase the purpose of this board, you're to review certain cases of alleged misconduct by WPD employees as investigated by their Professional Standards Bureau for the purpose of advising the chief about issues or concerns regarding practices, training, and administrative regulations. As your board works most closely with the PSB than any other department section, I feel it's especially appropriate that you review their policies. The Policy and Regulations Manual lists 136 publicly available policies. Of those, 65% are current up to date, 21% of them expired up to 2 years ago, and 15% of them are from 2 to 10 years old. 5 of those oldest 20 are supposed to be maintained by the PSB. The oldest of all of them is Policy 901, which was last reviewed April 5th, 2010. I can't reasonably hold current PSB leadership responsible for not updating their policies before they may have even been assigned to this section. I am asking that you hold them accountable from this point forward. Strangely enough, Policy 901 is where the PSB actually governs itself. There are many sections of the policy that are inconsistent with current PSB practices. And to clarify something that Chet and I did through email earlier today, I firmly believe that some of these policies, or some of these items that I'm about to bring up, are being done by PSB. It's just this document is so out of date, it's not been updated to say this is what we're doing. And these are things that some of them I absolutely agree with. For example, number 1, there is no current written policy that the trifold that you guys worked hard on creating be offered to prospective complainants. The good news is it is being offered, it's just not written into the policy to do so. I liken this to what the chief said, which is we've never really had a policy that says we don't use chokeholds. But in light of things in the last couple of months, he says, just because we have been training people don't use chokeholds doesn't mean it's not good to write it down in the policy too. That's just one more way to cover this is what we truly believe. So I think they're doing the right thing. I just think it needs to be added to the policy. I do feel a section should be added prohibiting PSB detectives from intimidating, harassing, or dissuading any complainants from filing a complaint. Number 3, according to the PSB webpage, the mission of the PSB is to ensure all complaints are investigated in a complete, fair, and impartial manner while protecting both the rights of the citizens and the members of the department at all times. Each possible method for a citizen to file a complaint requires the complainant provide their personally identifying information, presumably so that they can be engaged if there are any further questions. However, the PSB webpage also implies that this will actually be used or could be used to file civil or criminal charges against complainants if they were making false statements. Sharing the PII of an accuser with the actual accused is a recipe for retaliation. That would violate Regulation 3.603. Next up, the current wording of 901.01 is inconsistent with the stated mission of the PSB because it leaves out references to protecting the rights of the citizens. Another section says that citizens may report orally or in writing, by telephone or correspondence, yet the PSB webpage steers them towards recorded audio interviews as seemingly the preferred method. The complaint complement affidavit form that's mentioned in section 901.04 has been completely removed from the webpage and replaced with a web form that's not really suitable for printing. I do want to give them props. I went up, asked for one earlier today, took them seconds. They had it on hand, so I am thankful that that's changed in the last couple of years. That's worked well. Although a written letter is allowed, I do feel that there are a lot of people that are more comfortable with a printed form, and I do want to make sure that the printed form and the flyer is available in all WPD public lobbies. The substations, downtown, I think we can cover that fairly easily. Two other things I think we're doing right. In 90104E, I feel it's appropriate to require that a courtesy photocopy be provided of any one of those handwritten complaint forms. Chet said that is the policy. Great policy. Let's write down that policy so we can be more consistent with it. And even though this board invested months collaborating on the wording of the conclusion notification letter, we don't actually have anything in this policy that requires that a letter be sent to a complainant. It just says when we're done with the investigation process, we contact the officer. So the good news is we're doing it. The bad news is our policy doesn't require us to do it. I think we've got opportunities to fix that. I'm sure as you guys and gals, read through this a little bit more, you'll find some other opportunities for improvement. After all, the document is over 10 and a quarter years old. I think it's time to refresh it. We don't have to do it today, but I thought I would bring it to your attention. And I also gave to your chair, Jay, a list of every single one of those policies and procedures for the department, sorted by the oldest to the newest, so that, in my personal opinion, if the department were to be able to knock out 6 of the old policies per month, that'd be done in 6 months, getting rid of the ones that are over 2 years old. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions?
On number 3, where you talk about a method of filing a complaint requires the complainant to provide their personal ID information. My understanding is that a complainant can be anonymous in filing a complaint. Is that not?
Then we should put it on the form with, on the computers, we're used to seeing little asterisks. Asterisk means this is required, and non-asterisk means not required. We should do some things that make it a little bit more obvious to people of, you don't have to provide any of this if you really truly fear any type of retribution. But I've seen, not in this town, other places in this nation, if you go to ask for a complaint form, the first question out of the PSV's mouth is, what do you want it for? Who are you going to file a complaint against? Let me make sure that it meets my muster before I allow you to file the complaint. And I personally stood in that office a couple of years ago with one detective that we will say rhymes with Saul, and another detective that we will say rhymes with Sammy. And both of them refused to take my complaint. Now, that's, I believe, since been corrected. But if we've got people who are intimidating, harassing, or dissuading people by either the possibility of doxing them or providing their personal information to the officers who are being investigated, we're going to get less complaints. Does it mean we're getting less behavior that's being complained about, or that we're encouraging people not to file complaints? When I went up there today, absolute professional attitude that said, they said, here's the form, you can go online. They listed the laundry list. They said lots of different ways, file it however you want to. We're completely good with that. That's a big change in the last 2.5 years. So I think we're doing some things in the right direction.
Also on your number 1 about the trifold flyer being offered, I guess my issue with it is that, yes, it's being offered, but is it actually being followed? And because that's what I observed.
Good question. I think the first step was making sure that it was consistent and getting it made, and to say, hey, if you're unfamiliar with this form, if you're unfamiliar with the procedures, we would like you to have one of this. And if they say, no thanks, I don't want to mess with it, then say, okay, that saves us the nickel of the photocopy. But if to at least offer it every single time to say, as you're getting the form, hey, maybe you didn't know we also have this. That'll help things out. It's like getting your taxes. Sure, you can do the easy form, it's only 1 page long. But then you got the book that's 12 pages long on how to fill out the 1 page form. Thankfully, yours is a trifle. It's much easier to work with.
Pastor Sims?
Yes.
Keely's having a little difficulty transcribing what you're saying.
Sorry, just for the recording.
I'm sorry, I just,
That's okay.
oh, do I need to repeat?
I mean, if you want to, that's fine, just for the recording, sorry.
Oh, no problem. I find that the trifold flyer is being offered, but the actual procedures as outlined therein are not being followed. And what I referenced, there's a section in there on how an investigation is conducted. And the first thing it says is that you contact the complainant. And I know from personal experience that I was not, as the complainant, contacted. Now, PSB does thousands of these investigations. There should be a procedure, and that procedure is basically put in writing in that flyer. Then how do you not follow that procedure and then call your investigation due process? And so that's my issue. Basically, the flyer is that, yes, it's being offered and everything, but procedurally, there are violations by PSV as far as the procedure outlined in the flyer. And I don't know if other board members have read the procedure or what, but one of the other things it states is that at the end of their investigation, they will issue a finding. And again, in my case, no finding was issued, which is strange to me because there are 4 findings, 3 of the 4 favor the officer. And so if they're so confident that the officer did not violate any policy or procedure, why don't they issue a finding? And I don't know if the board is aware, but Robert Thompson has a complaint that's kind of been pending or ongoing for like 2 years now and hasn't been brought to a conclusion. That's not good. So that's what I would say in regards to it. Yes, the flyer's being offered, it outlines a procedure, but the procedure's not being followed in all cases. It certainly wasn't in mine.
In my personal opinion, the first step is to get our desires as a community and the department's desires and the union's desires all together in one document that's current to say, this is our goal. And if the goal is not being met, then there's other ways to work on that. But part of the fun is this document's relatively new, and this document has no clue that it ever existed. So I think there's opportunities to incorporate the two. One of the things that gave me concern was when you read the first paragraph of the entire 901, it says, they want to establish standard procedures for the investigation of complaints.
Procedures, right.
To ensure that the investigation of alleged misconduct is fair, impartial, and complete, to safeguard the rights of the suspected or the accused, and to exonerate the innocent. I'm sorry, I seem to have missed the spot where we safeguard the rights of the accuser, and where do we punish the guilty? It's not in there. It's exactly half of what it's supposed to be. And again, because it's 10 years old, if you look on the actual webpage of the PSB, it's a lot more balanced in their approach on that. So I think there's just opportunities to work these two together, and I firmly believe it doesn't do any good to complain unless you make suggestions. So that's why I pulled out some of the bullet points that I did as suggestions for improvements. And I don't expect this, if it's been 10 years getting stale, I don't expect it to get revised in a month or probably even 2 or 3. But I do think it's appropriate for this board to say, let's not go another 10 years before we fix it. So
I agree.
What prompted you to do this?
I'm
just curious.
I work in IT and mass communications, and I've been involved in a project that we use in our neighborhood for over the last 6 years. I wrote a piece of computer software that every single day pulls Charlie's blotter so that we can keep day-to-day track of a certain area of our neighborhood that we were having massive problems with at the time. And I literally get notifications of anything that goes down in that 2-block area the next morning. So it's been very important for us to say, here are the things that we're doing right as citizens. Here's the things that our neighbors are doing wrong that we need to report so that we're being part of the solution. Our community policing officers taught us well for Neighborhood Watch. We are the eyes and the ears. Our officers are the arms and the legs. And if we don't work together as a team, things are going to go down in our neighborhood. So I want to be part of the team in that we're working to live in safer neighborhoods. And I would love nothing more for our entire police force to be out of work because we were behaving ourselves.
Thank you.
I would also add another reason to expeditiously update that is because when you take the CPA class, they talk about how complaints are investigated in the class, and they're giving the class the same information that's in the brochure that's pretty much outdated. And so that's another reason for the expeditious update of that particular brochure.
Well,
Maybe we can ask the department to just give us an overview on the protocol for general policy updating. That might be something. I know they have a timing and protocol to do it, so we can put that on the agenda. So.
Chet already has a copy. I'll be happy to give them the original raw document that I worked from if necessary. But all of that information of when these documents should have been updated wasn't me coming up with a date. It's written in the documents themselves.
Right. Of course, in some situations, the policy just needs to be may not need to be updated.
Right. It may just need to be reviewed and say everything's the same as it was before, rubber stamp, and move on. Could be.
All right.
Well, I have found in my experience that policies get written and they put in the drawer until something happens. And then everybody says, what does the policy say? And they pull out the policy and they go, oh my God, we haven't looked at it for 10 years. This isn't gonna work or we need to update it. So
It's
as a
outside
rule,
of-
policies start out, but that's usually low man on the totem pole as far as the list of things you're gonna get done. And so it's not necessarily that they don't want to do it, they just don't have time.
You don't know how true you are. Within the last 5 years, I attended a very long class on community emergency response teams. And one of the things we were trained on then was pandemic. We already had a plan. There's already been a plan at the state level and at the county level. And there were a lot of people that go, oh, we'll just shove this in the drawer. And some of us go, I know exactly what the plan says and I know exactly how it's supposed to be put out there because we were trained on it. So we're hoping that getting the policy refreshed will be step one, and then making sure that our PSB detectives are trained on it and said, hey, we want to see you stick to this. But I think each one of you will have an opportunity to go through here, read something in here and go, hey, I wonder if that can be improved. And if so, bring it back and you guys discuss it as you can and see if we can't get a few of these stale ones updated.
As a reminder, all the policies are posted on the internet under the About Us tab on the website.
Yep, and I linked to them at the references on my letter as well. So.
Well, policies are often, you have your goal, you know what your policies be. It's the wordsmithing that makes it really work or not.
Understood.
And makes it not timeless, but makes it last a little longer, is all in the wordsmithing.
And I just remembered something that Chet mentioned a couple months ago. I do want to give grace on, which is we do not tell every officer how to tie their shoes in a policy. We don't get down to that level of detail. I firmly understand that. But there are some things that I believe that if we're already doing it, if it's already part of the training, it doesn't hurt to put it in writing because that removes some elements of officer discretion. There's sometimes when there's 2 or 3 good ways to do it, pick one. But there's other times that we'll get a more consistent response by having it as a written policy that says, this is really our expectations of the department.
Well, it covers your butt if you got a good policy.
Thank you, sir. We need to move on to our next agenda item. The next agenda item will be a review of a complaint investigation. And if you'll notice this time, and we're going to do it from now on out, I talked to the chief about it, when we review a a complaint or investigation, we are going to include in the agenda a description of what we are reviewing so that the community will generally know the essence of the case. And so that description is that on September 30, 2019, a Wichita police officer was accused of using unnecessary force on a citizen who was involved in an accident. Citizens who witnessed the event voiced their concerns as to what happened, and a request was made for professional standards to conduct an internal investigation into the incident. Because this is a matter involving officer personnel, I move that the Citizen Review Board recess into executive session for how long, Captain? How long do you think it'll take to review?
Maybe 10, 15 minutes.
Why don't we say 20 minutes?
Okay.
20 minutes to receive information on case number 19 PSB 3107 involving personnel matters of non-elected personnel and to protect the privacy interests of involved personnel. The board will return from executive session no earlier than 20 minutes from now, so that would be 5:48. All in favor? Or second? Is there a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we're going to go to executive session now. Thank you. Session now. The board reviewed the case and has taken no action and makes no recommendations. Is there any other new business?
Well, I had two things. I'm not sure if this is new business, but the last meeting I had asked to see if there was video for a tasing that happened. And I think Captain is gonna check on that. It's in the notes, it's in the meeting, or the minutes. So I didn't know if I could follow up on that.
Is that one of the case numbers that I identified in the
Yes,
minutes?
I think so, yeah. And I had asked if there was video, if we could watch it. I kinda thought that's what we were gonna watch today. I didn't have the number, I don't have it in front of me.
Was that one of the cases that you guys wanted us to
Yeah.
review?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just wanted to check to see if there was video and if we could put that on the agenda.
Okay.
I think what we did was we just put it on the list.
Okay. Oh, okay, all right, so, okay, thank you.
Yeah,
That's all.
I plan to present all the ones that you guys had brought up, so I
Okay,
ended
yeah,
up picking this
I
one.
kinda lost that on the,
Can you reference what page in the minutes that it's?
it's on the last page of the minutes. Page six. Yeah, but if there's others to come that are part of the list, that's fine. But I guess the unknown was their video, so.
Is that's the only concern, I can let you know if there's video.
Yeah, just to know if we have it, and if we have it, let's make sure we.
I have an answer for you tomorrow.
Okay, no problem. One more thing, last week, I hosted a discussion, some of the work that I do, we have discussions about the relationship between communities of color and law enforcement, and we host, I work at the Kansas Leadership Center, we have alumni base, and we ask them to get together to see different perspectives from an officer's perspective and a citizen's perspective. We actually used research from Dr. Berger that was here earlier today. But I wanted to commend two officers that were there, Deputy Chief Wanda Gibbons and Captain Lynn Moore. They both participated in the call, and I thought they represented the WPD well. And I received a lot of comments from people from across the state that they were really intrigued and a little jealous about they were talking highly of the Wichita Police Department, and so I just wanted to let us know that WPD had a pretty good reputation with other people and other communities, and also these two officers, I think, contributed to engaging in the conversation and being vulnerable and being willing to engage with citizens about the work that they do. And it wasn't always easy for them to engage. In my senses, it was probably tough, and so I just wanted to commend them, and I'll send Chief Ramsey a note about them as well.
Thank you. Any other new business? Let's set our next meeting. We would normally meet on the 27th of August. Is that good for the group? All right.
Yep.
Will it be here again, probably?
Yes, it will, yeah.
All right. Okay.
I'll let everyone know once libraries and public spaces start
Yeah.
opening back up to larger groups.
All right.
Well, are we gonna be next year at the rate we're going?
Is there a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
All in favor, say aye.